You all understand that the guiding principle of this conference, of this gathering, is so critically important. We all agree, as I said in my State of the State address last year, AI is the future, and the future is now.
One thing that I am thinking about, like actively, as we kind of see Gen AI become more and more implemented, and even in your question of kind of like how it connects to the broader enterprise, is as someone who has been now in more of the LLM ops and kind of the data development process, but then even before that was working at an ML ops startup, when that was kind of the big hyped thing that was the reason why teams weren't getting to production or unable to kind of see the value off of that first wave of AI, and really trying to get the put those aspects in to really be those AI enabled companies. Is I think that it is really interesting, kind of all of the operationalization kind of behind the scenes, and being able to OpenAI making it an API endpoint made it seem like it's a lot simpler than it will ultimately be.
Much like the seismic arrival of the internet, artificial intelligence quickly became the technology most every organization has sought to leverage, and we are still in the early days. Whether it's generative AI to assist with coding, consumer-facing chatbots, or agentic AI, enterprises are pushing their resources for more ways to work AI into the essential fabric of their operations. Why? Well, because AI promises to deliver new efficiencies, speed of delivery, and other competitive advantages. The path to realizing those AI expectations, however, comes with a variety of costs that are not all monetary. Could have surprising impacts on the world. I'm Jean-Pierre Ruth, Senior Editor for InformationWeek, and this is the opening chapter of a series of stories and video essays that our team produced to explore some of the costs that can be incurred in our collective pursuit of AI. Some of those costs might not be obvious or include escalating demands that organizations may face. Demand for AI has already hit feverish levels for companies and political leaders. For example, at December's AI Summit in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul talked up the potential of the technology and how the city and state are engaged in AI's growth.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. After all that, I'm also the first governor of the state to fully embrace AI, so put that on my resume as well. I'm so happy to welcome you. Welcome to the city that is the home of the most creative, the most ambitious innovators, the dreamers and the doers, and what I'm proud to call the tech talent capital of the world. Now, whether you're a New Yorker or a New Yorker wannabe, everybody's one or the other, you all understand that the guiding principle of this conference, this gathering, is so critically important. We always say this. It was almost 2 months ago to the day where I went to upstate New York, University of Buffalo, University of Albany, to announce that New York State had taken the first steps, the longest strides of any state of the nation, into a tomorrow that is defined by possibility. I unveiled 2 supercomputers more powerful than had ever been in public hands in the history of this great country. And as I saw those massive boxes begin to hum and whirl, I knew that New York had shown the world that when it comes to the AI revolution, we fully intend to lead the way. The federal government approved $6 billion so we can incentivize Micron to build the semiconductor chips over the next 20 years, not here in the city, but in upstate New York. This is the largest private sector investment in American history going on right now. So Micron and legacy companies like Global Foundries and IBM, TTM Technologies, they're all fostering an ecosystem of incredible explosive growth. And in so doing, we're transforming communities in every corner of this state. So the future of tech does not just reside in New York City. No matter how much it's flourishing, it's here. This is where people want to be. It's thriving in our small towns and on college campuses, where because of Empire AI, I can attract the smartest students, the PhD candidates, who want to have access to something that they would not otherwise have until they go to the private sector.
So New York is just one example of how this tech landscape is evolving. AI requires powerhouse hardware to house the algorithms, advanced chips to function as its brains, and escalating energy sources to feed it. That energy usage, for example, can have environmental impacts. The recent wildfires in Los Angeles County, California, put the preciousness of water resources center stage. Data centers can run hot, very hot, and that was before the burden of AI amped up the workloads they must carry. Cities and regions populated with data centers need significant access to water to try to keep that hardware cool. But what happens during a drought? What happens when teams of firefighters need water to hold back wildfires spread across thousands of acres? Information Week recently covered the tug of war over water in the LA fires, and this series will further explore such cascading impacts and costs that AI can incur. As we try to answer the core question, what is the cost of AI? Let's start small. Let's look at some of the costs organizations may face when they seek to develop AI-enabled apps in-house. This is often a way for enterprises to make their first inroads into leveraging AI for their operations. Developing such apps, as simple as it sounds, can call for new strategic planning, upskilling or hiring developers, and other demands that must be covered. At the AI Summit, I spoke with EY's Rakesh Malhotra, Principal for Digital and Emerging Technologies, about the kinds of costs the firm advises its clients to prepare for when developing AI-enabled apps.
What does it really, is going to take for organizations to invest into making AI-enabled apps happen? Is it a matter of getting talent, especially if they're trying to do this in-house? What are the kinds of things that they have to kind of consider and then think about before they're just going to be like, all right, we're going to do an AI-enabled app?
Yeah, so I think ultimately the number one thing people need to think about with AI in terms of cost is first putting a strategy together. So as we talk to clients, there are many science projects occurring in all corners of most organizations around AI. And many of them get, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of duplicate effort across these silos within companies. So first, having some type of a coordinated top-down strategy is really, really important. Secondly, I think just getting access to the infrastructure. Obviously through cloud infrastructure, these things are readily available. You can pay as you go. And I mean, we're getting 1,000x reduction in costs over the last 12, 18 months in some of these inference models in particular with AI. So I think that cost curve is really bending. But I think to your question more directly, having talent in-house that understands what does an AI-enabled app mean. One thing we're really passionate about is talking about agents and agentic AI. I talk to clients who have very different definitions of what an agent is or isn't. So I think having a clear taxonomy around what is AI, what does an AI app mean, I think that's really critical. And then I think, as we're implementing these projects throughout our clients and their environments, getting the data into a situation where we can access it and make it available to these AI apps is a fairly significant amount of effort, because the data tends to be very siloed across, again, all corners of the organization. So it's this data strategy, this data wrangling that needs to be done in order to prepare it and be AI ready is a significant undertaking for most organizations, and there's a cost associated with that too.
Now, even getting the work done with developers in-house, do many organizations have skills gaps when it comes to this? Because yes, they have developers who've been working on lots of other things. Do they have to essentially level them up on their skills to really be able to actually work on this?
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely a developer skill and education process that's involved here. We think of agents as a really new it's a completely new application model. right? And so as we went from, for example, mainframes to desktop client server to cloud to mobile, these were all eras of applications. I think this one's a more profound change than any of those before it. So aside from the actual technical skills I think developers need, I think there's just a set of philosophies that they need to relearn. As an example, AI is not deterministic, typically. If you ask the same question 3 times, you're unlikely to get the exact same answer 3 times. So how do you test, right? How do you know when something is right? How do you know when something is better? If you're comparing 2 AIs, which one's better? So things that otherwise might have objective results now become subjective. So there's a set of training around deterministic outcomes, testing. Obviously we spend a lot of time around responsible AI. How do you make sure there's not bias in the system? How do you make sure it's trained correctly? And then there are of course the hard skills as well, right? Which is like, how do I use these models? What tools are available to me? There are agent frameworks, there are APIs, all of these things need to be learned as well. So I think it's a very comprehensive set of new skills that developers need, starting with mindset, all the way down to fingers on keyboard building applications.
Or, what can organizations really like expect to face when they say like we want to do this, but now we've got to get the code, we've got to get the ingredients together. What is that going to potentially be a cost for them?
Yeah, I think, like many eras before, I think open source is going to play a huge role here in terms of cost. What we're seeing from clients is they're looking for base models that are freely available through open source communities and channels, and then to the extent that they need to fine tune or train them, they do it based on that existing model, so the cost of doing that is actually relatively small. Most of the attention has been on model training and these giant clusters and 100,000 GPUs. I think very quickly we're moving to a world where we're going to be talking about inference, which is really asking the AI questions and generating tokens, as opposed to model training. So I think the headline cost of generating these models, which is billions and billions of dollars, that's not really where our clients will see the cost and expense. I think it'll really be around inference and runtime and test time use of these AI. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of companies building these large-scale models with huge costs.
What kind of questions should organizations be asking of themselves when they're trying to put together their plans for AI-enabled applications? What kinds of thoughts should they really be forming in terms of the costs for themselves?
Yeah, I think that the number one question organizations need to start with, it's the same question we start with within EY, which is, what is the business outcome we're trying to generate? Sometimes it's tempting to look at automation. AI is just automation, saving human time, saving and creating efficiencies. I think that's a little short-sighted. Technology has always been about making people more efficient, more productive. But I think with AI, we ask customers and we work with them to really reimagine how entire processes could work. So a thought exercise we ask our clients to go through is, what would you do with unlimited headcount? How would this process be different if you had unlimited access to intellectual labor? And then it gets them thinking about what really can be done, how to really change the game of what they're trying to accomplish in terms of business outcomes. But it's got to start with the business outcomes, and then the efficiency and cost, I think, is a part of it. But I think even more importantly, it's like, what are new capabilities, new services that you can now offer that weren't really economically feasible at all prior to AI?
In separate interviews with experts from Ikigai Labs, IBM, and Cisco, we further discussed the costs associated with developing AI-enabled apps in-house.
Awesome. All right, so Jahangir, appreciate you making the time for this conversation, looking at, part of our AI series on the cost of AI and trying to get a handle on, what are the costs for working in-house to create AI-enabled applications in-house. Let's start at the top. What would companies really need to do to kind of really invest, gear up potentially from scratch to develop AI resources to enable their apps? Is it a matter of looking at trying to get new hires, first get the people there, other expenses that are really just here we're trying to get up the base level of we want to do this. Well, how are we going to do this? What are some of the considerations that the organization would have to really think about before they even actually get going?
Thanks, JP. Thanks for having me. This is a very good question, obviously top of mind for a lot of organizations. Several layers of answers, and I can go into any of those as you would want. First thing to clarify is, in this current, when people refer to AI, the generative post-ChatGPT generative AI phase, if you restrict the conversation to that, for instance, because that's top of the mind for a lot of people, I believe the answer to should we do this in-house is also nuanced in the sense that do we want to make our own, say, language model or foundation model, train it in-house? Usually, I'd be very surprised for most organizations across the world if the answer to that is yes. You should probably not invest in that. That could cost a lot of money in on the order of tens of millions to potentially even more than that. However, that doesn't mean we can't leverage and use those to build the apps that you would like to support the business use cases that you want. You could take off-the-shelf models. So you could take some of the open source versions. There are many good open source versions available that you could self-host, for instance, or you could get through one of the more well-known sort of cloud providers that can allow you to essentially make use of those. There is cost associated to serving those models, whether you're doing it yourself or you're getting it via an API through the providers, but that certainly dwarfs in comparison to training your own model. Of course, after that, the question is, what is your application at hand? And so this is where now this answer will start to get more nuanced. Is also, is it a generative AI application in the first place? AI is so broad. We've been working in that domain for a very long time, arguably decades and if not centuries old tradition, where some of the things you can do, you could have done with 5 years ago before ChatGPT, and you don't need the expensive compute hungry models, in which case your cost considerations would be very different. Perhaps you only need CPUs and not NVIDIA's GPUs, which are costly no matter which way you look at it. And of course, in some cases, you may not be as data hungry in terms of how you need to train the models as well. And data, of course, is also pricey, right? If you want a truly language model, you would have to be trained on the world's data. And then you want to fine tune it, quote unquote, that's the industry specific term, to your use case. Perhaps you're a legal application. Perhaps you are a time series forecasting platform like Ikigai is, in which case, if it's a generative or foundational model, you would have to fine tune that model and provide it lots and lots of examples to be able to tune to the domain that you want. So now the data has some costs. To give you a rough estimate, the cost is, Google recently inked this partnership with Reddit for 60 million to have exclusive access to Reddit's contents. That is the kind of, a scale of cost we are really looking at when you want exclusivity. But most organizations don't want that general purpose training. They actually want to be able to solve their own problems and usually have a lot of that data in-house. And so it could be free. It could not cost perhaps as much as Google's deal with Reddit does. But then compute is a big component. Of course, if you're using GPUs, a lot more expensive, also much harder to get access to these days. If you can do it in old school, quote unquote, machine learning and AI tools, that we teach in school still, and that's very relevant, then you probably don't need GPUs, and you could get away with using vanilla CPUs, which are plentiful and available. But of course, the third dimension to this is the environmental cost. None of these things run cheap or easy in terms of how expensive they are for electricity and consumption costs. And if you're going to farm it out to a very large use case, then you will probably be running in some sort of a data center that is going to be environmentally very prohibitive in terms of its cost at times as well. But of course, at the end, the question still is, though, how many users do you expect? You may only have a very tiny couple of users of your application, in which case perhaps you don't need to worry about any of what I just said. If you're going to farm it out to your organization, perhaps it's 100, 200, 500, 5,000 people organization, maybe not that big. But when you start getting into making it available to your customers, then you have to be always on, always aware. You could have concurrency issues. All of those lead to a lot of cascading compute costs.
Gotcha. That's a lot to digest, and I appreciate those thoughts. Let's like dial it back a little bit, kind of get at like some of the specific base elements that, as an organization, they've got an IT team. Maybe they have devs who have worked in AI. Maybe they have not. Maybe this is breaking newer ground for them. If it's coming down from the top that they want to do this in-house, are they going to have to, like, say, start looking at spending money on training those in-house developers to make this happen? This is not something that they can just say, well, you've been working on all these other things, you have the skills. This is something that they would have to consider, like, hey, we have to actually get them trained up, or find some way to bring in additional hires to do this if they insist on doing this in-house.
Yeah. So I think thank you for reminding me, that was one critical component remaining, the people aspect of all of it.
Mhm.
Of course, to be able to leverage a lot of the modern AI tool set, and if that is something that you want to leverage in your use cases, it is not going to be sufficient to essentially rely on IT departments to be able to do it, because IT departments are great in helping you sort of figure out the infrastructure components, perhaps. But in terms of the know-how, yes, there is specialization. Yes, it's slightly more rare, but of course becoming less rare because the other part to this, so it's costly today, costly to
Mhm.
retrain, costly to hire people with that particular skill set. You may have to hire, depending on the use cases, maybe people with advanced degrees, and essentially also you're competing with enterprises, massive enterprises. I used to work at Google, so I can definitely shed light on that as well, which is essentially yeah, those the pull factor, the market for competition is obviously very hot, right? And so that is one aspect. But the good news, of course, is that in order for somebody to upskill, a software engineer of today, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, I think it will be a base expectation, not
Mhm.
just being able to write code, but also being able to write AI compliant code and knowledge and machine learning and some of those tools and being able to use them. That knowledge is actually not very expensive to acquire, because a
Mhm.
lot of the courses I teach at Stanford, I teach at MIT, a lot of the courses there are public. They're either on YouTube or through specific channels. The code is public. The exercises are public. The time to go from learning about it to actually applying it is not that long. Now,
Mhm.
does that mean that practically you can train somebody in a month and say, go apply it to a real world problem? Of course, it's not as simple as that. But the time to train somebody is not on the order of a decade at this point. It would be on the order of several months, where somebody with a prior experience can actually upskill. So there is good news, but perhaps in the short term, the cost angle will probably remain to be slightly more on the expensive side. Yes.
Gotcha, gotcha. And if an organization, and thank you for that, if the organization were to, try to go this route, how long are we talking to, I mean, and again, it will vary depending on what resources they already have, what they need to bring in, what, all they've got to pull together. Uh, Trying to create AI-enabled apps, is it ultimately, so at least right now, is it something that's going to take longer than developing non-AI-enabled apps by comparison, comparable time, faster? What can they expect? They might say, we want this now, but what will now potentially turn into?
Very, very good question. I think the answer, obviously, I'm not going to discuss very specific new cutting edge applications, because obviously that would be true. If you're in a medicine, for instance, doesn't even have to be AI. That might be, cutting edge and take time. This is more sort of you're adding an AI layer, let's say, on top of your existing apps, or you have some other use case. Is it different than adding something pre-world of AI and some of these tools? I think the short answer to that is not really. It's like these things are becoming more service oriented, where you can layer these on top with APIs, with open source APIs, with sort of like, the code and the algorithms being available. It's mostly how you want to use it. But the good news there is, once the AI piece is sorted, and usually it's becoming more click and play, even if you don't fully understand the models, you don't need to anymore. You can essentially still be consumers of it, right? Now, once you have that infrastructure piece figured out, how are you going to consume this? What's the right thing? That may require a little bit of specialized knowledge, or at least more current aware knowledge. That can be acquired, hopefully, with practice in, say, a matter of a couple of months or so, and not a couple of years even. After that, we have the same problems that engineering has solved for many, 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 many decades at this point, which is, how do you host these models? How do you serve them up? How do you put them in production? How do you test them? How do you prevent regressions? All of them are engineering challenges that we have solved before. And as technology has evolved, we've had people who are still today pretty well equipped to handle those as well. So I think there is the initial sort of piece. Usually it might be around how do you sandbox what you are essentially after, which may be the newer components. Good news there is that there are a lot of APIs, tools, services available, and a lot of training content freely available that can actually short circuit this process and reduce it down to a matter of a few weeks, and not necessarily longer than that.
Gotcha. And just to, and again, this is something that we probably can't get a absolutely solid concrete number on, but the scope of the actual costs to say, say like, create from scratch or even licensing, are we talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions that organizations at least have to at least get their arms around to understand that that while it's something they're interested in, is not going to be something that is going to be something that's going to be inexpensive for them to try and make happen.
I think it really, we are seeing this across the board in our conversations with our customers, is that it really depends on how sort of where you want this role to be played. If you are in the experimental stage, of course, I'm going to ignore that because they can be very low cost experiments, they can be free experiments, and they can be somewhat costly. If you're going to build it into the DNA of your company, you're essentially not just adding a layer, you're essentially trying to sort of bring AI to all of your, say, product suites and offerings and whatnot. That might be a little more costly, but it's not going to be costly any different than integrating newer technologies that is generally part of the engineering evolution anyway. And I don't believe that there's going to be a bigger differential there. There may be a little bit of like upskilling costs, like we discussed. There may be a little bit of APIs may be more expensive today because the costs are going down. So maybe in a year, some of those things may be smaller in terms of costs as well. Of course, this is all assuming you're not doing your own model training and hosting, because if you're doing that in-house, then there is no running away from, the cost could run into hundreds of thousands or millions, actually far more, tens of millions of dollars if you're doing that. Most companies are not going to need that, in which case I would say this is not different. So this is on the order of, if you're trying to release, let's say, a new feature on an existing application, if that cost you like tens of thousands before to maintain, to build, to actually support, it's probably going to be on the similar order of magnitude. If it's certainly not going to be a lot more than that. The order of magnitude difference is not going to be there. But of course, if you're building a brand new application, then it obviously depends on how many users do you expect and some of those sorts of things. And I think the unit economics are obviously going to be slightly different.
Creating AI-enabled applications, but if they want to do it in-house, what would they at least need to start saying to themselves, okay, this is what we're going to need to invest in to gear up, and if we're going to try to do this from scratch within the resources that we have, I mean, they're going to need to start looking to increase the talent that they have in-house with hires or training. What are some of the things that they're going to have to actually sit there and weigh if they have the desire to do this, but what steps are they going to have to start considering?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, great to be here with you. When we think about the cost to be able to build these AI applications, the first thing comes to be the talent and what it means to actually start designing, developing your Gen AI enabled applications with the people. And when we think about the talent, Gen AI has done a wonderful thing for the development community. It's lowered the barrier of access to AI and what it means for a general developer to infuse AI into their applications. Because what used to be isolated to just the data scientist is now available to the software developer via APIs. So that's the first thing. Yes, there is an enablement of the application developer to understand the APIs and understand what it means to infuse AI into their applications, but the barrier to access to being able to do that has been lowered. The second thing is, if you look at the skills to develop these Gen AI applications, the general developer now has AI to assist them in the development of these software applications. The entire software development lifecycle is now impacted and infused with generative AI, being able to accelerate and optimize the development lifecycle from designing to developing to testing those applications. We now have Gen AI solutions that help accelerate and optimize that entire lifecycle. That's just one of the areas where we see generative AI costs being impacted in terms of the selection criteria, not only on the talent, but on the tools that are used to actually build these applications. The second thing we see is really wanting to really figure out which model should be selected, and the cost that it takes to be able to tune a model for the right outcomes you're generating in your application, and the inferencing cost of that as it's embedded in your application. And when we look at this, we think about wanting to have smaller models, which kind of translate to lower cost, that are open and available to everyone with trust and transparency, which is really important. We see that when organizations start with open source models, it increases the likelihood of having positive outcomes in achieving the targets of their projects. Because in most cases, those open models, like what we've seen, are trusted and transparent, and they're able to get benefits from the community. So that second thing is about model choice. The third thing we see when it comes to costs in developing these AI applications is being able to run it where you need it, whether that be in one of the hyperscalers or on premises. What we're seeing is a lot of organizations that really want to run that in a hybrid way, and that also becomes a factor in the cost. So these three things, in terms of your skills and your tools to develop the applications, your model choice, and running them where you need to be, are the three things we think about for consideration.
Gotcha. So it definitely sounds like there are, a lot of layers to how the expenses can really start to break down if they're going to try to make this happen in-house. It's not just going to be, we'll just hire the people and then be off to the races to make this happen.
Yeah, but remember, the skills that are needed now are much more easily attainable. Yes, you need to skill your application developers to understand how to infuse AI, but it's very akin to, I have a set of APIs to be able to embed certain capabilities into my application. These are my generative AI APIs that I can use to start embedding Gen AI apps and Gen AI into my applications.
Gotcha. And kind of picking up off of that, how are things changing in terms of the APIs, those actual resources to build from? Are we seeing more and more resources becoming available that organizations can potentially go and grab or license or work on? What is happening with that kind of like field of available resources that they can essentially, I guess, maybe shop for to look at?
Look, when we look at the resources that are being used to invest in these generative AI applications, what we're seeing is most organizations are continuing to invest in infusing generative AI into their applications, either being Gen AI first applications, which is where we see a lot of organizations generating more value, or taking their existing applications and infusing that. So the resources and the investment dollars are definitely increasing, and the education that exists in terms of actually having tools that help assist you in being able to infuse Gen AI in your applications are actually increasing as well. Remember, when it comes to how do you design an application, you can now have generative AI tools that help you with the designing of your application. When it comes to developing your application, you have tools that now help you actually do code generation, code explanation, that can do code testing for you. And so the resource investments are not only increasing, but they're improving and using Gen AI themselves to be able to accelerate how many applications we see now being infused with AI.
And what's it really taking to bring this all together in terms of cost of data, the time it's going to take to to train the AI? What about those elements?
Yeah, when we look at most enterprise use cases and building enterprise applications that are infused with generative AI, we really see enterprise Gen AI as a data problem. And so that does mean that there is work to be able to take these models and to be able to infuse an enterprise's data into those models, whether it be simple techniques like RAG, or whether it be creating a fine-tuned model with that data. Now, the techniques and the tools to be able to do this as well are actually becoming easier in the market. whether that be using techniques like Instruct Lab techniques where you can actually take your data and easily infuse that into the model. We're seeing a lot of that becoming easier as well, to where it's lowering the barrier. But it's about not only the model choice, it is about the data and having that be available in an open way.
And ultimately, with AI-enabled apps, is it ultimately, are they ultimately slower to produce, or is it faster than working on non-AI enabled apps? So just trying to get them for those organizations that might be weighing, hey, that's interesting. You want to work on AI-enabled apps, but what if we can get what we need without actually going that route and be more efficient? Is there, have we come to a place where we're seeing like how that's actually shaking out?
Look, my perspective is every application developer is going to be a Gen AI application developer. And that means any developer that wants to be relevant in today's world is going to have to understand how to use these Gen AI tools and APIs to be able to infuse into their applications, which means that it becomes a lot more it becomes a lot quicker to develop these Gen AI applications. And with a lot of the investments being made in the software development lifecycle using generative AI, it is going to be a lot quicker to not only build these applications, but to put them out into production. So I think we're going to see a shrinking of the time it takes to build, to develop, to test, and to put these applications into production. And we're going to see a infusion of a lot more applications out there because of what generative AI is going to be able to empower and envelop for the developer.
All right, well, again, I really appreciate you making the time for this. So let's talk about, again, we're looking at the base, the costs and the considerations organizations need to face should they want to develop in-house AI-enabled apps. What are some of the things that need to be considered, going into, this potentially gearing up portion of like getting ready to try and like, hey, we're going to try to do this in-house. The costs, the resources, the time, and what are the things that like come into play that organizations and companies can face that want to do this but might not really have that initial understanding of what they're going to be getting into.
Sure. As you know, I am leading a team that is part of a larger organization that is called People, Policy, and Purpose. So we are into the HR domain, into the workspace domain, the sustainability, also the social impact, the government affair. So differently from the typical IT function, we're looking at a couple of additional elements that wrap around AI that are less technical, but still very important. On one end, there is this governance element, the ethical and responsible application of AI and usage of data, which, when you're deep into the IT engineering development, you're just going into the features that you can get out of that and the value that you can get out of that. Thanks to our perspective, we are widening it on one end on the data that are available and we can use, but on the other end, on the experience that we create. I tend to think that features are fundamental for the value that they offer, but people will remember and use the experience and the quality of the experience that you create. And so when we're thinking about how a function like ours can gear up to really start addressing AI, I would consider the creation of internal resources and a team that is dedicated to that. And so, for example, going a little bit into the journey, data scientists that are able to wrangle, transform, and structure the data that you're going to use. And also the ability to create your own data in view of using AI. We like to say that we're now into the age of clarity to a certain perspective. What we mean is, as an HR function, as an example, if we're not writing our documents, our procedures in a way that are easy to be integrated and leveraged by the AI machine, then we will need more effort into that. So there is an element of data science, Of course, we will need ML engineers to train new models, but also UX designer. Again, I will never stop stressing the fact that the experience is what is going to drive your people into that. And finally, architects that are able to integrate the new application and the new features into your legacy system, but also the disparate system that you have in an organization, right? And we know that. So this will be, to a certain perspective, the team. Also, we know that organizations like ours are typically relying heavily on IT function, which is absolutely good, both from a cost perspective and from an expertise perspective. At the same time, having the ability to create teams that are exploring the capabilities and what AI can do from an employee experience perspective, or a team or a leader experience perspective, is something that IT teams are not, geared or formed to do in their, for their nature. So this is where I would stress this, this additional need for expertise and capabilities.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Looking a little bit further on the expertise, there are a lot of talented people, but they may, like you're speaking to, they may or may not have the specific AI-oriented skill set at the moment. How much effort, how much of a a cost, or in terms of training them or bringing them in is should organizations kind of start to weigh in order to make this happen? Because they might have folks who have been working, in a non-AI to some regards. I'm sure that there's some folks who have dabbled in it, but to actually deliver on what they're looking for, is that like another, the thought has to go into this, the training part really, or the training and or hiring needs to be an expense that they consider really.
Yeah, absolutely. So on one end, I think, again, let me take it from our own perspective, where we're not targeting immediately AI creators. So, the people in our organization, our product organization, that are creating our new products or our new solutions with AI. In our world, right, this corporate function world, on one end, yes, we do have developers. And so what we are doing is, on one side, we are offering the best external training available, but on the other end, we have identified and created internal sandboxes and playgrounds where they can play and develop their activities. Also, it could be a very interesting opportunity to have people that are experts in this domain from other functions entering into our corporate function. For example, my team is built with people that do not have strictly HR competencies from the hardcore human resources environment, but there are people that are coming from UX design, software development, human performance technologies. And together we are approaching whatever is the new emerging technology that we want to apply. So there is an element of developing through the best of breeds of the training that is available out there, but also giving them the opportunity to play. So creating these playgrounds or sandbox is fundamental. Last element that I would not underestimate is the ability to put together a low-code and no-code environment, right? Through AI and generative AI particularly, I remember even up to 5 years ago or 3 years ago, we said that either you code or you will be coded, right? Now with this Gen AI that is integrated into the low no-code environment, this is not immediately true. And so the other element is, how do we develop the capabilities and the expertise of our people to become citizen developers, how they're called, which is not only having or needing coding capability, but is the ability of understanding how the machine works, which is the level of abstraction that you need to create, which is the level of architectural knowledge that you need to get in order to be able to develop your own app that can be integrated and hosted by the higher level infrastructure.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you for that. What other types of, expenses, do you kind of like really need to break down, or have you thought about breaking down when it comes to, really kind of like driving this to actually, take it from like idea to actually delivering?
Right. And so it's interesting because, again, particularly when you're starting with the idea, you just go with, okay, which are the tools that I need, and which are the limited environment that I strictly need to create my app. It's more than that. On one end, you have the operational infrastructure, really, the network, the servers that you're doing, the electricity that you're going to use, particularly with this new technology. There is also an architectural infrastructure that you need to take into consideration. What does it mean? Changing and developing systems that you already have to be able to integrate and leverage the AI solution that you are developing. Another fundamental layer is the data infrastructure. So again, what does it mean to have access, but also to transform the data architecture that you have, and also every now and then, particularly in large corporation, the siloed data lakes that you have, and also how do you use them in a responsible manner, which means there is a cost in terms of effort in asking yourself the right question related, am I going to use the right data in the right manner? But also the workaround that you need to put in place to make sure that you're doing that.
Mhm.
And also the tests that you want to do on the tools and the platforms that you're using, so that the result that you're getting is at the level of responsibility that you have. And finally, of course, the experience development. And after that, the operationalization of that into your infrastructure. And so again, when we're thinking about AI, we always like the sizzle part of it,
Mhm.
but there is the hardcore infrastructure that you need, from really the cards and memory that I'm going to use, to the data, to the platform, and to the operationalization of that. So this is how we typically structure that.
Gotcha. I appreciate thoughts on that. So you talked about data. I was thinking about like the actual cost of the data, how long it will take to train, like the AI on the data, and also ultimately, at least for right now, is it slower or faster to be even working on the AI enabled apps versus just listen, we know this works over here before we try to start dabbling in this area. Is there some kind of kind of way to kind of like give a barometer of saying like, hey, it might be faster to just not worry about this right now, continue maybe work on this side, or whereas the cost and the effort of doing that set aside by the fact that the potential of what we're trying to do, it's like yes, it might cost this, it might take this time to do this, but the potential for what we're looking towards, we need to kind of just tighten the belt and just kind of go for it.
So yeah, so I think there is, I love this question, because on one end, there is a lot of automation that we are now calling AI because it's cool, right?
Yeah.
And so we should clearly tell ourselves what we're doing. And so if we are automating processes, that's fine. Let's continue to do that. If we are creating new ways to do what we used to do differently, this is a different story. So let me answer in two ways. First, I mean, every time you're using a new emerging technology, of course, it's going to take longer to develop it today, and it's going to take much less in 6 months, right? Both because you need to learn the tricks and how to properly develop with this technology, and also because the technology itself is going to develop farther and farther and make processes, their own processes, much easier. But on the other hand, we should really start asking ourselves what we can do today that we never dare to think in the past. And so, of course, if we are approaching AI and generative AI as the opportunity to do things not only differently from where we were doing it in the past, but to get new insights, get new intelligence, have new solutions that weren't able to be achieved in the past, to me is a no-brainer. This effort is absolutely worthwhile doing. And also, if you don't do that, you will be the one left behind. So to me is, in general, I don't think there is an option whether, should you invest on AI or not. Is definitely a hell yes. But on the other hand is what you're going to invest on, how you're going to apply AI into your world. And going back to McLuhan, don't ask the new tool to simply do in a better way the work of the old tools, right? It's not simply a faster, quicker, more productive. Is also, well, what is the quantum leap that we can do with this new solution and new technologies?
These early steps and their costs may be necessary for most organizations to consider, but there is some sense that as companies develop their AI muscles, the heavy lifting will become part of the operational routine, at least when it comes to AI-enabled apps. And eventually, you might not need to point out that AI is in the mix because it is expected.
Fax machine was actually quite amazing. And at that point, though it was quite important to the way we did business, we never called anything fax enabled. We never said that something was fax enabled or typewriter enabled before. But in this generation of technology, right, we mention AI all the time. And my view is, number one, that so far AI has not lived up to the mark of being mind-blowingly revolutionary. It might be in the future, number one. Number two, that when we really know that AI is part of the way we conduct life and business is when we stop referring to it, right? We don't refer to things as internet enabled anymore, although 10, 15 years ago we did. We don't refer to humans as air enabled or water enabled. We never talked about businesses before as typewriter enabled, but now we're constantly beating the drum. Even if you look at the title of our panel, it's about AI enabled applications. So my perhaps provocative, perhaps heretical view is that you'll know AI is part of your company deeply when we stop constantly referring to it. That's my premise, that's my hypothesis. Tear me down if need be.
So this is day one, chapter one in Information Week's series on the cost of AI. Follow our website and our YouTube channel for more stories and video essays to come as we delve into the myriad of ways that companies may have to budget for and plan for their pursuits of AI's benefits.